an album like Dirt is one that definitely deserves a re-review. I talked about this album whenever Coverkillernation first began back in 2010, indicating that it's definitely one of my favorite albums of all time, but also giving many reasons as to why that was. Here we are 4 years later doing a full Alice in Chains discography, and we need to talk about this album again because it's a critical point in their discography. We need to speak about it also to see if perhaps 4 years has altered my thought process on this album at all. In reality, no, it hasn't. This is still a beast. This is still one of my favorite albums of all time, and certainly one that should stand forth as one of the greatest grunge albums of all time, or hell, one of the greatest rock albums of all time. This is one that should be on a lot of different lists. May not necessarily be your favorite in the Alice in Chains discography. I've heard some people say they love Facelift more, but those two albums are so damn close I can understand why. But why is Dirt this way for me, and why is this a keynote portion of their discography? Well, let's talk about it a little bit and kind of determine that together. After their early successes, Alice in Chains were certainly a band that were kind of on a roll, and this is an album in Dirt that was really launched to be their sophomore effort. Now, sophomore efforts have the potential to do one of two things, and that's, escalate over the original and certainly give this band a wave more of momentum, either that or kind of fall a little bit short and maybe signal that this band didn't have the house of fire that everybody thought that they did. However, whenever Dirt was unleashed amongst the masses, it's certainly one that really showcased that this was a band that was the former of the two. It escalated everything. It really put things on a different pedestal. Now, the variety that you heard on Facelift is certainly present on Dirt as well, so it's not like that's something that's dissipated. However, some of the, maybe happier tones that you heard on Facelift on songs such as Sunshine, even though the song itself was about the death of Jerry's mother, certainly that's something that was really scaled back a lot more and not something that you heard as much on Dirt. In fact, if anything, they amplified more the downtrodden side of this, the more depressing scale. And really, this is an album that I almost like to consider a tale of two sides, almost like we're reviewing the old cassette version of this album as opposed to a CD version or just, multimedia files. And I feel that this is important because it really dictates one of the central pieces, one of the central stories that I feel is being told on this album, which probably isn't what's really happening. It's probably just bona fide coincidence. But at the same time, it's hard for me not to ignore this. So let's start. The very first portion of this album is one that opens up with many, many key tracks that really showcase a little bit of the tone, and it's all ended up with Rooster at the end of side number 1. Now, Rooster, of course, is not one that's going to really morph up very well with my theory, which I'm about to describe. However, Rooster was definitely a special song for Jerry. Not to mention, this is one that definitely bared a lot of unique resemblances on this album, mainly because it has its own character to it, its own real fold to it. It's the centerpiece of the album with its length. But at the same time, it also was the single on the album that certainly got the most recognition and respect. Rooster was one of those tracks that also just really transformed the abilities of Alice in Chains. It showcased that, while they were able to do some softer, more acoustic work on the Sap EP, this was something that they could easily incorporate and give a heavier edge to on an album such as Dirt, or really anywhere in their discography, and it would go together very, very nicely and very well. In fact, it went together so well that this is still a song that you're going to hear on the radio today if you listen to the radio long enough. It's one of the favorite Alice in Chains songs that many people like to play if they are radio DJs, and it's certainly one that does still pretty well define the band. The vocals on this album are certainly one of the strongest points. You really hear the real strengths in the vocal department that this band possesses. Meanwhile, Jerry is able to really just conjure up these, this riff and the structure and everything that just really gives the song the certain amount of respect that it truly deserves. And that's certainly something that's not always difficult to find a counterbalance to. So the fact that he was able to do so on this record certainly has a lot of significance to it. Not to mention, it really showcases his evolution personally as a songwriter. Songs such as Rain When I Die certainly give a bit of a solemn tone to the first portion of this album, but it's certainly not where that's going to really showcase itself the most. Rain When I Die is another one of those great tracks that I just absolutely love calling up every now and again and just belting out the lyrics to. I'm not necessarily the world's greatest singer. I'm certainly no, Cantrell or Lane Staley myself, but this is one of those tracks that's just almost impossible not to sing along with once you learn what you're talking about, once you learn the lyrics to it. It's got a great tone to it. It's got a very, very addicting introductory riff, which they do, really use as repetition for a little bit. There's great rhythm behind it. Just really love the performance by everybody on this track. And these are two of the real big, big highlights from side 1, at least for me. Now, whenever we get in a side 2, this is whenever my theory starts to get a little bit more weight behind it. Oh yeah, that theory. We should talk about it. I feel that this is a theory, or this is an album that really is showcasing a lot of elements of drug abuse and a lot of elements of death. There's a lot of things that could certainly be stated about that, especially whenever you look at the album cover. Now, the rumor was that Lane Staley lost a girlfriend that just kind of, she's gone, dead. And the individual that is on the cover that looks to be about to be submerged in dirt, that is kind of, given a ghostly tone to it, is supposed to be representative of her. And this is something that gave the album a lot of the character in which it did. The first side definitely has a lot of elements of death to it, with items such as Rain When I Die. And once again, whenever you mention Rooster, you talk about the death of somebody who was in war, really giving them a little bit of the effigy that they really deserve. The eulogy, rather, not the effigy. Oh, two completely different things. The song like Eulogy that Rooster was able to deliver definitely kind of gave a bit of a light side to the dark side, but you immediately got into the dark side with the second half, where you could almost just call this Lane spiraling completely out of control. Either that or just the effects of spiraling way out of control, with songs such as Junkhead, which starts off side 2. This is a track that definitely glorifies drug use and then completely continues on with songs such as the title track Dirt, which seems to really illuminate the idea of somebody who's on drugs and cannot bear that which has happened and wants to die. It sounds like a very simplistic idea, and it sounds like a very simplistic theory, but that's really all the more that there is to it. This is almost like the trademark ride that a drug user sometimes goes on, especially if the drug use is being done during times of duress, as opposed to just being done for the hell of it. As you continue on, the songs start to get a little bit more psychedelic, You definitely get to have a little bit more of that feel that this was a trip that's all of a sudden gone from, the enjoyable nature of trying to find and trying to choose what you want and then just taking it, to immediately pondering death, to then getting into the realm of the complete and total high, which has now blinded all of your emotions, all of your feelings, and has now basically given you visions that you perhaps didn't, see or hear before. I like the element of the clown laughing, and I also like the element of the untitled track, which sounds very much like a carnival. Then you get into something like Angry Chair, which kind of represents maybe a slow build back up, and something that's really showcasing a lot of the emotion that you have once you've come back down and now you want some more. Where you're sitting on an angry chair, either that or you're sitting wherever you are, and you're immediately needing to ponder what you're doing next, because now all that is gone, and now you need to rebuild all of that. I don't necessarily include Wood in this, because there's a good reason. The fact that this is a song that was dedicated in the memory of Andy Wood from Mother Love Bone certainly is one that doesn't exactly bode well with the theory. However, I do like the song cycle that precedes it, and I think that my theory stands pretty well for that, even though it is a little bit loose-based. This is a great song, and once again, it's another go-to track for radio DJs that want to play a track from Alice in Chains, and it's certainly one that works, so there you have it. Overall, this is an album that just really showcases feeling and emotion in ways in which you won't even hear from emo albums of the past 10 years, and that's the reason why I think I'm really turned off by a lot of that stuff. I'm turned off by the faux emotion that's really delivered by a lot of these lyricisms, not to mention they don't seem to be really incorporating problems outside of basic social issues that are handled by teenagers, really cheapening the whole idea of emotional structure and subculture, and really denigrating it to something just as simple as to whether or not somebody likes them or whether or not their parents let you do what you want. Instead, this is something that talks about, many different things that have negative effect. It talks about death. It talks about addiction. It talks about loss. There's a lot of undertones just of helplessness and despair. And really, this is something that delivers all of those ideas without being a doom metal album or without really being an album by a band that typically delivers these types of gloomy atmospheres. You're not necessarily listening to The Cure here. You're not listening to Candlemass. You're not listening to suicidal doom metal. You're not listening to Silencer or any band of that variety, or Shining. Instead you're listening to Alice in Chains. They're able to do this, and they're able to rock and grunge hard throughout the entirety of this record. They border a lot on metal with this record, and really with all of their work. And they're able to showcase the same level of doom and really helpless atmosphere that you're going to hear on all the bands that I mentioned previously, only they're able to do so with this real sense that this is a personal album. That personality is certainly what I love about this album the most, and I also love the musicality on this beast. This is probably one of the most perfect albums, musically speaking, that I can think of, and it's just based around the fact that all of the riffs are so good, and it all feels so damned representative of all of the different things that they're trying to convey lyrically, or at least thematically, that it certainly delivers on every single level. The choice of songs was definitely resplendent. This was something that they obviously worked very hard to perfect, and if they didn't, then damn, they just got, the most perfect set of songs in history, and then just ordered them in a great way. I really do think that there was a lot more thought put into it, so I'm not trying to cheapen that. Instead, I'm just trying to say that if it was something that was that simple, then wow, lightning in a bottle. They definitely captured it, and they definitely released it. This is one of the most successful Alice in Chains albums of all time, sales-wise. In fact, I think it is their most successful sales album. And with fair point, this is certainly a classic disc. And even though it didn't have perhaps some of the star-laden tracks, such as Man in the Box from Facelift, it certainly had its own sets. Rooster was a huge breakout hit for the band, and definitely gave them a lot more attention. Songs such as Them Bones were short moments just like We Die Young on Facelift, and kind of gave it the same opening, stance to it. Overall, this is just an album that's all about the character of it and all about really delivering on the theme, and musically speaking, it's just beautiful. This is an album that really is going to put you in the mood. It's going to almost make you feel as though you're sitting next to Lane Staley while he's going through this insane drug trip, and you're going to really legitimately feel a lot of the things that he feels on this disc, and that's something that's really hard to represent musically unless you really have a talented group that really has their pulse on what's going on as far as their music is concerned, but also in terms of their personality. And this is certainly an album that delivers that. Well, anyway, that's enough about one of my favorite albums of all time. It's time for us to get into some of the stranger moments of Alice in Chains' discography, while also talking about one of their biggest successes.